We are now joined by one of the all-time guests on the Ostrom Avenue podcast. He's been on many times before. It's Mike Waters of Syracuse.com. Mike, how you doing on this Wednesday morning?
I'm a little blurry-eyed, Ethan, to be honest. An incredible game at the Dome last night that had us up late, looking up a lot of records and a lot of history. But other than that, I'm fine. How are you?
Doing good. Yeah, it was an exciting game to watch, to cover, to listen to. Let's talk about it. There were some, two losses in a row to Colgate for Syracuse, and then it looked pretty likely it was going to be a third down 24 at one point in the second half. What were your overall takeaways from the game?
Well, as any sports writer, beat writer understands, my best lead was scrapped. We had all written our stories at around halftime or at the 4-minute mark of the second half, right? Um, that's just a dramatic shift. Colgate was dominating that game. They had whatever they wanted on offense. They were executing terrifically, shooting the ball well from three, controlling the ball, not turning it over, increasing their lead to 24 points early in the second half. And then just to see the game change. And, for me, it came out of nowhere. I mean, yes, they were going to put on the full court press, but Colgate's a veteran team with a great little point guard. Actually, not that little. Braden Smith is excellent. He's a returning starter. He's only a sophomore, but he's a returning starter. Their front court's all seniors and grad students. These are all guys that have been to multiple NCAA tournaments. They're experienced and they're good. And to see Syracuse succeed in that press was really eye-opening. And I don't think a lot of people across the country will see that score and appreciate it for what Syracuse was able to do. They'll see Colgate and they'll kind of go, oh, well, how did Syracuse ever get down by 24? That's the real story, right? And they won't really, they'll just kind of go ho-hum to a comeback against Colgate. But this is a Colgate program with 6 Patriot League titles. They've gone to multiple NCAA tournaments. Keegan Records alone has been to more NCAA tournaments than the entire Syracuse roster combined. So, to see Syracuse just, really baffle, bamboozle, frustrate, fluster Colgate to that end was really amazing. So, and it also, for a team like Syracuse, a lot younger, new head coach, 4 minutes into that second half is when a lot of teams quit. It's when a lot of seeds of doubt start to grow. And it didn't. Adrian Autry was able to keep those players focused, not on the big picture, because that would have been too much. 24-point lead's insurmountable, right? But he had them block it down. 4-minute games. And if you tracked every 4 minutes from that 16 mark on, Syracuse kept cutting into that lead. So it was a pretty amazing night at the Dome.
In the first couple of games, it's been kind of a consistent theme. Syracuse being gritty. The first 2 games really weren't as blowouts as maybe some Syracuse fans expected. And Adrian Autry said at the end of the week is he was proud of how gritty his team was to kind of grind those games out. This one, another example. What have you seen from the team that's on the younger side? I think it's the youngest team in the ACC, just kind of surviving and not letting that bad non-conference loss kind of hit their schedule early in the year.
Well, they're learning on the fly here. Adrian Autry wants them to play more man-to-man defense, and I think they haven't shown yet that they can play man-to-man defense for the full 40 minutes. And Adrian Autry mentioned that last night. The first 2 games against New Hampshire and Canisius, they basically won those games by playing about 6 or 8 minutes of really good defense. And the rest of the game was kind of like a really disappointing effort. Guys weren't playing with the intensity that you have to have in order to win at the college level. They were playing like high schoolers, to be honest, in man-to-man. They were a little lackadaisical. They were playing cool. Colgate last night, they played about 16 minutes there of really good defense. And again, it wasn't all half court. It was because they were out in the full court, but they never let up. The intensity, they maintained it throughout. which Adrian Autry mentioned in the post game last night. That was great, right? And you needed that kind of effort. And it gives him a chance to impress upon the players. This is what we're talking about. Here is the difference. You see the way you played in the first half, and what was the result? And then look how you played in the second half and what happened. And this is what we've been trying to tell you. Sometimes players need to experience it before they really understand it. And now they just have to start to learn to play it for more than 20 minutes. Try to get it to a 40-minute level, the way Virginia plays the Tony Bennett defense. Virginia doesn't play defense for 16 minutes a game. They play it for 40. And that's how Virginia's gotten really good under Tony Bennett over the last 10, 12, 13 years.
When I look at the defense and the man-to-man defense and watching the difference between Colgate and Syracuse, you could see how, especially in the first half, whenever Syracuse tried to get, Naheem McLeod up with a high ball screen, they were always hedging really hard on the guard with the ball, whether that was Judah or whether it was JJ, because they weren't scared of the threat of McLeod rolling to the basket because, he's a bigger guy, so it takes him a little longer to get to the basket than someone like a Malik Brown who's a little more agile. When it comes to the man defense, to me, it kind of feels like they're trying to break a bad habit with the zone. Like it's like they're biting your nails or something, where it's like zone is biting your nails. And then when they're playing man, it's like, oh, we're not biting our nails. But then you kind of have to go back to it because you're not biting your nails and you eventually fall back into that bad habit. Why do you think, especially in that first half, Colgate was able to do such a good job against the man defense when they were able to do a really good job against zone the past couple of years? Why did playing man not make much of a difference at all defensively?
Well, I don't think it was so much in terms of breaking a bad habit. I don't mind that analogy too much, but I'll differ with it a little bit. When Syracuse was in zone, it could look bad if they didn't play it hard, if they didn't play with intensity. The good Syracuse zone teams, and you guys haven't been around for them because Syracuse hasn't been a good defensive team, period, for the last few years, right? You haven't seen the zone played the way the 2013 team played it, or the way the 1996 Final Four team played the zone and other teams played the zone. You can play zone and play it well if you play hard. And also if you have the right pieces, if you have the right personnel. And so that hasn't been the case for Syracuse in a while. So this team, they're playing a different defense, but they're still learning how to play it hard. And yes, in a zone, every once in a while, maybe you could get away with being a little flat-footed. The ball might be on the other side of the court. You weren't going to get beat backdoor because your man could go and there's going to be a center in the paint or forward picking him up. Yeah. So yeah, I get what you're saying there too. Yeah, you could develop a few bad habits if you were allowed to in the zone. You shouldn't. You should be a good defender, but you could develop a bad habit or two. So they're just learning again how to play. Now, how did Colgate do so well in the first half? That's a good Colgate team. That's a Colgate team that led the country in three-point shooting a year ago, and they lost a couple guys, but they still got Braden Smith and Ryan Moffitt and some new guys who can shoot it. You mentioned how Colgate defended the high ball screen. They hedge hard, but they don't switch all the time. They try to get through the screen, and against Syracuse, you don't always have to fight over the screen. Your center can back away from a Naheem McLeod and give the guard a chance to go under the screen because you're not worried about Judah Mintz or JJ Starling shooting a three. If they do, you're like, okay, let's see if he makes it. And both Judah and JJ have been struggling from out there so far this year. Colgate doesn't have to go over the screen to stay with a shooter. Syracuse does. And Syracuse guards, whether it's Judah, JJ, or whoever else is out there on the perimeter, Kyle Cuff, Quadir Copeland, they do need to learn to fight through screens. And most of the time, they're going to have to fight over the screen because whether it's Colgate or almost anybody in the ACC, that's a guy who can shoot. So if you go under a screen, you're giving a guy a free look from three-point range. And yet, if you don't fight over it hard enough and that hedge isn't good, that guy's going to come off that screen and slice right to the basket. So it gets tough. Basically, Colgate has an easier time defending the Syracuse ball screens because the Syracuse guards haven't proven themselves yet to be shooters that you have to worry about.
And that's something that they're going to need to do, especially when you're starting to face more difficult opponents as this season goes on. You mentioned that 2013 team. I think when you say that, I think about the Sweet 16 game against Indiana and the Elite Eight game against Marquette that year is when that may be the best zone that I've personally gotten to watch. Watching from home or whether that not at the vantage point that probably you did watching it up close, but as a fan at that time, being able to see what a zone at its peak can probably do. You mentioned Judah and JJ as individual guys. Any big surprises performance wise? I know Chris Bell had the big night last night, but looking at two preseason games, three regular season games now, what is the biggest surprise from an individual player perspective that you've seen so far?
I don't know if anybody has completely shocked us. We expected Judah to play well and be an aggressive. I don't want to say ball dominant, but obviously the ball's going to be in his hands a lot. But aggressive guy who's going to want to get to the basket, and he's been doing that. JJ hasn't shot it really well yet, but he's still contributing. And again, I guess Justin Taylor's first few games were good. Shooting it well, bailing out Syracuse in a few games when no one else was making a three. But now it's good to see Chris Bell start to get that going. You were hoping that Justin and Chris might be guys to help spread the floor for Judah and JJ. Even if, Judah and JJ, other teams are going to be like, yeah, we're going to back off of you a little bit because, one, you're not great three-point shooters, but you're also so dangerous getting into the lane, getting to the rim. They got to back off of you a little bit. But even if someone backs off a step or two, Judah can still go. And he proved that last night. He gets to the line 14 times. Judah, I mentioned this to Brand last night on the pod. Judah drew 10 fouls. He's so aggressive going to the rim, and he plays through contact. He drew 10 fouls. Colgate as a team drew 11. I mean, that's amazing for a 6'3" guard. Usually guys that will lead a league or a conference or whatever in drawn fouls are big guys. Maybe a 6'8" forward or a 6 guy slashes or even a center. Like Armando Bacot should lead the ACC in fouls drawn. But I don't know. Right now, it might be Judah Mintz, which is incredible.
We were talking about how young this team is. Pretty much the entire starting lineup and really the guys that play are sophomores, with the exception of Naheem McLeod. Looking at the roster, we don't want to make any too early preseason, predictions, whether they're correct or not. They've only played 3 games, but because how young this team is, how long do you think it's going to take for us to be able to see what their floor and what their ceiling could be for the entire season?
I'm not making any pronouncements on this team until at least New Year's. For one, the upcoming schedule is brutal. And they could lose some games. It could be a bumpy ride here. They got Tennessee in the first round of the Maui Invitational in Honolulu. The second round game is going to be against either Purdue or Gonzaga. You're going to come home after that. We don't know who they'll get in the third round. But then you come home, you get LSU. You got to go on the road to Virginia. You're going to play Oregon on a neutral floor. You're going to go at Georgetown. Buckle up and don't panic. Just, if you're a Syracuse fan, don't panic. If this is a team that's learning, everything's new, and they're going to learn from these games, but it could be a bumpy ride. And I'm not going to worry about anything really until New Year's, because I still think that if this team, these players collectively can keep their heads about them, and even if they do go through a rough patch here coming up, but if they can just kind of maintain their poise, I look at the ACC and I'm like, they can beat some of these teams. They could do well. Now, there's a whole bunch of ACC teams out there that are probably looking at Syracuse going, we can beat those guys this year. So I looked at KenPom.com, his website, and he had Syracuse playing, it was around 14 or 15 games this year where his computer data suggests that it's going to be decided by 5 points or less. 15 games by 5 points or less. And he had them losing a lot of those. So he didn't really have them coming out with a great record, but those are a lot of close games. And if this team gets better, and I really do think they have the potential to grow, They could do well through January, February. It'd be really interesting to see what this team, how they're playing in January, February. That intrigues me. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I can't wait to see what this team becomes.
I remember you said on Syracuse Sports with Brent before the season that you weren't going to panic until at least after the Maui Invitational. So now you're doubling down on it even further until New Year's. But I guess the follow up to that is if Colgate, let's say Colgate's up by 24 at one point in the second half. If Colgate goes on to win that game by 20 points last night, I'm not saying the fans, I'm guessing, will probably have lost their mind. Would you still have been no panic at all even after that kind of a margin?
A little panic.
Little panic. Okay.
And not so much panic. It's just one of those losses where if you're going to try to reach goals and also maintain, the potential for being a postseason team, you can't lose that game. Now, if you do lose it based on the previous 2 years and looking at the rosters this year and everything, I wouldn't have been shocked. That was predicted to be a close game. And to see Colgate come in and shoot the way they did in the first half and everything, you're like, well, it wouldn't have shocked anybody, shouldn't have shocked anybody. The margin at halftime was a shock, but an outcome of a loss wouldn't have been a shock. But it's still one of those home games that's the kind that has really kneecapped Syracuse over the last couple of years. You don't get in the tournament when you lose to Colgate. You don't get in the tournament when you lose home games to Bryant or other teams like that. That's the games that end up hurting you. So let's see where they go. Yes, they're playing some big boys here soon, but listen, you go out to Hawaii and lose to Tennessee and Gonzaga, that doesn't necessarily end your postseason hopes. Those are quote unquote good losses. And we'll just it'll be interesting to see how they do against teams of that caliber.
Do you think being an underdog in those games is a good thing in that sense for this team? That, playing like kind of, where like if you lose this game, oh, it's a good loss, so it doesn't really hurt you because you're not expected to beat a team like this. Do you think that kind of frees them up a little bit more?
I don't know if these players really see themselves necessarily as underdogs. I mean, we all sort of get it, right? But I don't think they buy that. And in a way, certain programs can't ever be underdogs. Colgate can beat Syracuse 2 years in a row and still come in the dome and cast themselves as underdogs if they want. Yeah, we're gonna do it again. Whatever motivates you, I guess. And maybe Colgate might have said, no, 2 years in a row, we're going in the dome and we're confidently coming in and we expect to beat these guys. I really think that was probably Colgate's attitude, but you see it in the NCAA tournament sometimes. Sometimes I think fans see the scrappy underdog, but if they really got inside that locker room, they'd see like a bunch of players that had a lot of confidence and felt like they were going to win, not an underdog attitude. So that's more for movies. This Syracuse team, I mean, you tell Judah Mintz and JJ Starling, who were top 50 recruits, they're underdogs. No. But given the national perception of where Syracuse is and everything right now, no one's going to bat an eye if they lose to Tennessee. So in a way, it's not like you're hurting your profile or something like that. You're not hurting your ranking. But if you do take down a nationally ranked team out there, people are going to take a second look and go, well, what should we think about Syracuse? Maybe we should adjust our thinking.
I think it's going to be interesting to see Syracuse playing a little bit down to their competition in the first couple of games. Not that Colgate is down, but they're solid, to see if they rise to the occasion and play up to their competition with a Tennessee, Purdue, or Gonzaga. But going to the Maui Invitational, Syracuse has been there a couple times before. I'm pretty sure they were there with Adrian Autry, and I'm pretty sure they won with Coach Autry back in the day. Do you have any great stories from covering any of the Maui Invitationals, and why have the teams that went over there that have been successful? Why has that been?
I've covered 3 Maui Invitationals, including the one that you mentioned where Adrian Autry was there. The thing that I remember about that one was Indiana was also out there, and it was the debut of Damon Bailey, who was a ballyhooed recruit out of the state of Indiana. He was an Indiana high school legend, and everybody was Damon Bailey mania. So we got to see the Damon Bailey out there, and that was a Syracuse team that relied on guys like Billy Owens and Dave Johnson, and Adrian Autry was, in the starting lineup. I believe that was his freshman year, if I'm not mistaken. And then you had another team that went out there. I think it was the Jason Hart, Aton Thomas years. So again, these are good teams, man. These are good teams with good players. There's no mystery how you win, right? You don't win 3 in a row because you're, lucky in a game or made one last second shot. And then you had the team that was it the 2013-14 season with CJ Fair, the team that got off to a 25-0 start. Again, CJ Fair, Jeremy Grant, Tyler Ennis, 3 guys. I mean, Jeremy Grant's making millions in the NBA now. Tyler Ennis was a first-round pick. CJ Fair had, more than a little cup of coffee there in the NBA. You had guys. you had guys back then. It's a tough tournament. It's a great atmosphere. I don't know how the atmosphere will be this year since you have to take it over to Honolulu instead of Maui because of the wildfires. But Maui, they always put on a great event. It's a great experience over there. And I think it's good for players to learn to play one day after another. It mimics your conference tournament format when the ACC tournament goes and you'll play one game after another. You get used to the rhythm of that. And even though it's not exactly the same as the NCAA, actually it's tougher because Maui, you're going to play 3 games in 3 days. And the NCAA, like that first weekend, you're going to play 2 games in 3 days, but you do get used to playing, back to back or, game off day game. So, and also it gives you a good read on where you are and what you're going to have to do because, they're really going to be able to measure themselves against some of the top teams in the country. I looked it up again on KenPom.com. 5 of KenPom's top 10 teams are in the Maui field. 5, and there's only 8 playing, and one of the 8's the host school, Chaminade. So, Syracuse is sitting there looking at this going, it's like that old saying about when you sit down at a poker table, if you can't find out who the mark is, if you don't see him, it's probably you. It's like, Syracuse is looking around at this field going, oh crap, it's us.
My lasting memory of the 2013 tournament was the CJ Fair dunk that led to the bloody cheek. That was one of my favorite memories. Not the only time CJ Fair has driven down the lane and given Syracuse fans a lot to cheer about. When it comes to covering these tournaments as someone who's been there, you mentioned playing 3 games in 3 days and how that's different from kind of what this team has experienced. I think back to last year, and obviously it's a lot different. They're playing in Brooklyn and not in Hawaii, but it felt like I was there and talking to Judah Mintz and Benny Williams after the game. Those games, Judah played terrific, if I remember, against Richmond and then against St. John's. And Syracuse ended up losing to St. John's. Both those games went to overtime. That those guys kind of reveled in the fact that, we're playing for Syracuse and we're playing, even though it's we're playing in New York, and that's kind of a big deal for Syracuse. It's not the same playing in Hawaii, but it seems like now that those guys have that experience from last year, even though it's not the same thing, it still is important that they went through that last year playing a couple games in a row.
I'm sure it does. But you got to remember though, Kansas, Gonzaga, Purdue, they've been through it too. And they've got some experienced team. Tennessee is loaded with experience. Their backcourt with Descovy and the Ziegler kid has been playing. He hasn't been starting yet, but that's a veteran backcourt. So yeah, I think that all equals out. And, some of these teams have NCAA tournament experience that Syracuse doesn't have. So, that's going to play out. But the players do like these environments. You can tell. They see other teams walking through a hotel lobby. In Maui, I don't know how it'll be over in Honolulu, but in the Maui gym, you actually have to, if you're playing in the game, then, like the 2:00 game and the noon game is going on. When you come in, you actually have to walk through the gym. It's like a high school gym. So to get to your locker room, you walk in and you see teams walking in while another game's going on, and they're watching. And then teams will actually come out and there's like an area in the Maui thing where there's like an upper area, and teams will be sitting up there watching like the game where they're going to get like, the winner or loser then the next day. And you don't see that in a lot of places, but it's really a cool part of it. So yeah, the teams and the players, they get a lot out of this. And we've got Donna DeTota headed out there to cover the game for us. I'll be manning the fort back here at home. It was her turn to take the exotic trip, but as you guys probably have figured out over the years, it's like these big trips aren't as much fun for the people who have to work when we go. Like sports writers and the players are the only ones that they go to Maui and we come back with no tan because you're in a gym all the time.
That's funny. That's funny. So we talked about the ACC schedule being manageable this year. You look at a bunch of those games and they're winnable games. So looking at the non-conference, Maui included, you got Georgetown, you got LSU, you got Oregon at a neutral site. Looking towards a possible NCAA tournament berth because Syracuse hasn't made it the last 2 seasons. How likely and how many wins do you think Syracuse in the non-con, and maybe against who do they have to kind of squeak past to set them up for being on the bubble or having a chance towards the end of the year to make the dance?
I think a couple of the key games are the home game against LSU when they come back from Hawaii, and then that road trip to Georgetown, a true road game. And right now, those 2 games look like toss-up games. They really are. They're 50-50 or 45-55 type games. Those are close ones. Syracuse needs to win both those. First of all, you don't want to lose at home. Losing in Hawaii is one thing. Losing to Oregon on a neutral court would be another thing. But if you can win at home, you got to win at home. You don't want to drop that. And also, you want to win that true road game. And of course, beating a rival is always a special thing too. But if they can take those 2 games, and let's say they lose 2 in Hawaii to nationally ranked teams, and let's say maybe they lose to Oregon on that neutral floor, but you can navigate the rest of this schedule. And then if I'm doing the numbers in my head, that would be an 8-3 record in the non-conference with losses, none at home, all on neutral courts, at least 2 of them to nationally ranked teams. Oregon might be nationally ranked at some point this year. You don't have to make any apologies for that. And then you got to do your business in the ACC. Now, one thing that's going to throw everybody off in this whole thing that we just did is you got that road game to Virginia. And people are going to be looking at that too, going, oh, wait, it's non-conference. Oh, it's conference. It's like, and the problem is it's right in the middle of all this. So that's where this ride that I described as bumpy gets bumpier because they got to go down to Virginia for a road game on Saturday, December 2nd. That's really going to be asking a lot of teams. That's a lot of games away from home. As Adrian Autry mentioned at preseason media day, he did not make this schedule. No first-year coach would, right?
No one would put that kind of difficulty on their first season as head coach. And it seems as though the committee puts a heavy value on non-conference wins is a theme we've seen over the past few years. And if Syracuse can steal one in any sort of way against, right, like you're mentioning, an LSU or Georgetown, or even if they could put up a fight against Oregon, that would go a long way.
Yep, Mike, that's a neutral court out there, and that'll be a weird environment. That's one of those small little places. I don't know how many fans Oregon expects to bring. I don't know how many Syracuse alums live in Sioux Falls. That'll be weird. That to me, that's going to be playing in like the Badlands version of the Bahamas.
You said your colleague Donna DeTota gets to go to Hawaii. Does that mean you get to go to South Dakota? You get the other end of the exotic trip?
Woohoo! Nothing beats a December trip to South Dakota.
Have you ever been to South Dakota?
We live in Syracuse, for God's sakes, right? We can't cast aspersions. But it's, listen, I'm actually kind of excited about it.
Have you ever been to South Dakota? You've never been?
Nope, never been. I wish Mount Rushmore was a little closer.
Yes, I was looking at that too.
I think all of us in Syracuse taking that trip took out a map and said, "Wait, what? 5 hours?" So I don't know if any of us make it. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm excited. I love good basketball games. I think an Oregon game on a neutral floor will be a really interesting game for Syracuse. I'm sure Adrian Autry wishes he had a home game against somebody really bad instead. So, but no, you get another non-conference neutral court game against a tough Power 5 opponent. So
I remember when that game was announced last year, I was like, this is a joke. Like they're not playing Oregon in South Dakota. But it should be really exciting. Mike, can't thank you enough for your time. Where can people find your work, read your stuff?
Syracuse.com is the website. I'm at Mike Waters SYR on Twitter. The podcast Inside Syracuse Basketball is available on YouTube and Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts. So I'm out there, folks. Come find me.
Thank you so much, Mike. Looking forward to reading and listening to all your stuff throughout the rest of the season. And we'll talk again soon.
All right, guys. Hey, listen, this was great. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.